All right, guys, time for DX Commander Part 2. Let's take a walk out to the antenna and take a look at some of the things I have done to this bugger since the last time we chatted. First big change is just there to the right of the coax connector on the middle thread. That's the 80-meter element. It's an inverted L configuration. Goes up the pole, up to the very top spreader where it comes off at one side, and then it does the inverted L thing. Comes down here, eventually becomes what you probably can't see is a piece of pink string that runs off into that willow tree and is tied down there at the bottom in the weeds. You may also notice some writing on there, along with the bird dew. It's on these plates as well. What I discovered is that when I drilled the top spreader plate for guy wires, I ended up creating plates that are no longer symmetrical. So they have a top and a bottom, and it matters which way you mount them. Writing the numbers for the different bands on there marks not only which side is up for the plates, but it also helps me to get them in a nice straight line the first time on the pole. When I run the very first element through whichever hole it goes through, I know I've got them all lined up and everything is going to be nice and straight. No twist when I stand this thing up. I did try out a suggestion somebody left me in the comments on part 1, and I bought some of these turnbuckle style hose clamps. These things they're just okay. They're an Amazon special, and the band is stainless, but the screw is not. So we'll see how long they hold up. So it's nice that they don't require any tools, but unfortunately, they don't work so well when you get to an actual plate. See, the hose clamps sit directly right on top of this plate, and there is just not room for the little lever that they put on the screw there. It runs into the plate. You can only turn it about a half of a turn, and then you're done. So for now, I still have the traditional style, requires a screwdriver or nut driver type on the spreader plates. And the last thing worth talking about here is the tape. You may be able to tell, maybe not, that there is tape underneath this hose clamp. There's actually tape on every joint of this pole running up the entire 10 meters. What I found out the hard way is that when you have a friction fit pole and you get water in between the sections, you no longer have friction. And your 10-meter pole turns out to be an 8-meter pole, and then a 6-meter pole. Every time you look out the window, it's a little shorter. That's really rough on the tuning. It's not really a flaw in the design of this antenna, it's just the nature of these fiberglass poles. Obviously, if you're using it the way it's intended, temporary, set it up, use it, take it down, complete non-issue. If you're doing what, as it turns out, I'm doing and leaving the thing set up for weeks or months at a time, you're probably going to want to tape the seams in the pole, keep water out of the inside of it. It just makes your life easier. So bottom line, it's been a month and I haven't had any problems that I can blame on the DX Commander design. Once I got the pole collapse issues straightened out and realized that the wire that I used is just completely and totally unfit for outdoor use. I've had to put new ends on my vertical elements twice because the copper that's in there is so crappy it just it corrodes nearly instantly and breaks. So I go to key up the radio and my SWR is all over the place because one of the elements is not attached anymore. So it works great for the radials, no problems on the radials because there's no tension on them. But for the vertical elements, I may have to break down and buy some of the DX10 or something from Callum because the speaker wire is just kind of so-so. There is one other thing going on that's interesting, but to talk about that, we got to move inside and fire up the analyzer. Got the analyzer hooked up and wanted to show you in detail how the antenna is behaving at this point. If you watched part 1, you'll remember that I had spot-on tunings and fabulous SWR readings across all of the bands. Well, I still have great performance out of the antenna, but adding the 80-meter inverted L is not without its charms. Let's just have a look at it here. Let's go ahead and run the tune for 80 meters, and I guess this is going to make more sense if we look at the SWR probably just by itself. Change the scale to max out at 3, and what you see is that my SWR on the 80-meter inverted L is less than 2 to 1, but not by much. It's resonant somewhere in here, somewhere in a 3.9 range, which is what I was shooting for. the upper end 75 meter band, if you will. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure why it's no lower than that. Now this is completely usable the way it is. In fact, push comes to shove, you could probably run that most radios even without a tuner. I have an internal tuner. I go ahead and hit the button. May or may not be necessary. It makes me feel better. I know I'm losing a little bit of signal and not actually improving things on the coax by doing that, but at 80 meters, things aren't too bad on even that 250 feet of coax that I have. And just for grins, if I do a sweep of the entire 80 meter band, let's go ahead and change this back to 5 so we can see the whole thing. You'll see that the entirety of the 80 meter band is less than 5-to-1 SWR, and it doesn't go above 3 until, where are we here? Somewhere in the 3.68 range. That's the limits of the built-in tuner in the 7300 anyway. So usable, I have 3.6 and change, 3.7, something like that, up to the top of 80. All the phone stuff I'm interested in is up here in the top. It's going to work fine. Here's the more interesting picture. This is my 40 meter sweep. I have the scale set to 2-to-1 SWR at the top of the scale. So you see that the entire band is still less than 2-to-1, still completely usable, likely without any sort of a tuner on most radios. However, my resonant point is no longer 7.10. It is now down here at 7.08 or something in that vicinity. I've gotten a little bit of linear loading on my 40 meter element by putting the 80 up next to it, which has made it virtually just a tad longer and shifted it down. It's also bumped my SWR up just a little bit. I was getting a flat like 1.0 at the 7.1 spot, and it's up to 1.25 at this point. Now again, it doesn't really matter, but it did change. And in fact, if you go up here to the top of the band, we're almost up to 1.9. We're getting into the area where you don't have to run a tuner, but if you have one, you might turn it on, you might think about it. That's up to you. I do. When I get up here above 7.2 at this point, I have the tuner come on just because it makes life a little bit easier for the radio, and it requires so little tuning that I don't figure there's a lot of signal loss. Moving up to 20 meters, you see things didn't actually change much. The 20 meter band, the resonant frequency moved down quite a bit more. It was up here at 14.2, and now it's all the way down here at 14.085 or something like that. So the 80 meter, that big long wire between its capacitive nature up at the top and just its mass has moved 20 down quite a lot. However, it's still up here at the top of the band. What does that say? 1.43. This is a no tuner required band, full stop. Now, if I'm going to leave the 80 meter element there, I could go back. In fact, I might go back and shorten the 40 and the 20. Just bring them back into more of their optimum range. But just to give you a clue at what happens here, this linear loading, it shows up everywhere. If we go up to 10 meters, it's less prevalent. In fact, I might go so far as to say I can't guarantee that it actually moved, because I was claiming it was resonant at 28.6 previously, and now it's 28.563. I mean, that's close enough for jazz. Measure it 3 times, you'll get 4 answers. So 10 meters hasn't changed much. This is the first time, though, that I have looked at the 10 meter band on the full graph like this. And it's kind of interesting to me that I can use, what is this? 1.57. So it's about 1.5, 1.6 to 1 above the resonant point of the antenna. And the SWR doesn't shoot up until you get down to the very bottom end of the 10 meter band. So kind of interesting. For the sake of completeness, here's the 15 meter tuning. It's with the exception of this little bump right here. For the most part, it's 1.5 or less to 1 across the entirety of the band. Again, that 40 meter element is now a little bit long due to the linear loading. So you can see the resonant point is all the way down here at the bottom of the band. I don't know if I shorten the 40 meter element, if that would actually move much or not. Might be worth an experiment to try it. Checking it on 30 meters, no go. We're, what is this, 3.75, 3.7-ish SWR across the entirety of the band. It turns out that 30 meters really is a third harmonic on 80, or at least close to it, but these harmonics always tend to resonate on the high side for some reason. They don't really come out right. So let's come up here and let's scoot this up to 12 megahertz, run the scan, and yeah, there you can see the dip. This thing is actually resonant at 11.4, 11.450, something like that. So it does have a resonance on the third harmonic of that 80 meter element. It just doesn't land on the 30 meter band. And one last thing, just for fun here, I ran a sweep up to the limits of the, well, it's actually the limit of the software. The analyzer will go up to 250 megahertz, but the software doesn't know that. So it's limited to 180. Point being, if you do that, you know, we have all the bands that we looked at down here in the HF space. But once you get up to, we'll call it 40 megahertz, 41 megahertz, any frequency higher than that has a less than 2-to-1 SWR. Essentially, that contraption out there starts to act more like a long wire or a random wire. It's so far away from being a quarter wave vertical on these higher frequencies that the characteristics of it change a little bit. Would be interesting to see the far field plot. If you run 70 centimeters into your DX Commander all band vertical. Maybe Callum will do that for us one of these days. I don't have any expectations that I'm going to be running VHF or UHF with this antenna anytime soon. But, you know, hey, if you're in the field and you're trying to get into the local repeater and it's the only antenna you got, at least, you know, it'll load up. Speaking of operating from the field, I'm taking my DX Commander on the road. Going to do some Parks on the Air activation over the 4th of July holiday here in the U.S. I'll shoot some video, leave some comments down below if you have any interest in seeing how Parks on the Air works or the DX Commander works in the field, or just whatever. Shoot me a message and let me know. Think about hitting that sub button while you're down there. Everybody have a happy, healthy, and especially safe 4th of July.